Hello and welcome to Starbound. Ever wonder what would happen if an invincible alien race went up against humans? Well, let's get into the story. The sleek Talosari cruiser glided effortlessly through the star-studded void. Commander Sarah, his multifaceted eyes gleaming, tapped idly on his armrest of his command throne. Another routine patrol in another unremarkable sector. Years of undisputed power made even the hint of danger seem quaint, a relic of their past. Sarah stifled a yawn, a biological glitch of his undeveloped mammalian ancestry. The Talosari had long secured their dominance, their master of energy manipulation, their seamlessly integrated artificial intelligences. It made them virtually unassailable. Millennia of peace had softened them, made conflict a distant memory. A sensor alert jolted him from his reverie. "Unidentified signature, Commander," the ship's AI intoned, its voice smooth and devoid of inflection. "Primitive propulsion systems, carbon-based life forms." Sarah's antennae twitched in amusement. Primitives. Another backwater species reaching for the stars, unaware of the true powers that shape the cosmos. "Establish communication," he chuckled. "Let's extend a welcome, shall we?" The screen flickered to life. His laughter died in his throat. The creatures stared back, bipedal, crudely symmetrical. But their eyes... In their eyes burned a primal intensity that sent a shiver down Sarah's chitinous exoskeleton. "We are from a world called Earth," a voice crackled through the speakers, rough and grating. "State your intentions." Intentions? The primitive dared to ask him of intentions. The audacity! "Your technology amuses us," Zira sneered, regaining his composure. "Submit to the Talosari authority and you shall be integrated into our—" The transmission cut off abruptly. A wave of energy unlike anything he'd ever encountered washed over the cruiser. Systems flickered and died, plunging the sleek vessel into an eerie darkness. "Damage report!" Zira barked, his voice tinged with newfound urgency. "Shields offline, weapons non-responsive. Commander, they've targeted our core energy systems." "Impossible," Zira hissed. The very notion was absurd, yet the evidence played out in a terrifying spectacle before his eyes. On the view screen, the primitive vessel surged forward, no longer a lumbering relic. It pulsed with a volatile energy propelled by an inferno seemingly wrenched from a dying star. These creatures were mad. They were on a collision course, ready to sacrifice themselves to inflict devastating damage. Was it madness, or a terrifyingly effective tactic born of desperation? "Evasive maneuvers, reroute auxiliary power," he shouted, his usual calm shattered. His orders were met with panic chaos. It was clear the humans had crippled their ability to respond with the usual Talosari precision and calculated efficiency. The ship shuddered as the primitive vessel bore down. He wasn't just facing an unknown enemy, he was facing the inconceivable. Defeat. The Talosari civilization had always prided itself on its logic, its reliance on superior technology and intellect. These humans were chaos incarnate, defying every strategic principle he'd spent a lifetime mastering. Their willingness to self-destruct to achieve victory was an unfathomable tactic, an alien concept. "Prepare the escape pods," Zero ordered, the words a bitter confession amidst the cacophony of alarms. Survival, once a footnote in Talosari military manuals, was now their only objective. His command throne, once a symbol of absolute control, tilted wildly as the ship's structural integrity crumbled under the relentless assault. The viewport flickered, and for a frozen moment he locked eyes with a human on the other bridge. The creature grinned, a feral display of teeth amidst a face streaked with grime and determination. In its eyes burned a strange mix of desperation and insane resolve, a terrifying promise of annihilation. Zira clawed at his restraints as a surge of animal terror, something he hadn't felt in centuries, momentarily overrode his usual composure. The human ship slammed into the cruiser's weakened hull. The energy arced in blinding flashes, and the sleek Talosari vessel, once the pinnacle of intergalactic might, buckled and tore apart in a horrifying display of destructive force. Coughing, covered in dust and some unidentifiable liquid, Zira staggered out of the wreckage. Around him, panicked shouts in his own language pierced the ringing in his ears. The once disciplined ranks of the Talosari were in disarray, the very foundations of their order crumbling. The humans had landed, not with displays of superior technology or grand fleets, but with a savage ferocity backed by simple, brutal weaponry. It was a primal onslaught devoid of the elegance or technological finesse the Talosari prided themselves on, but it was terrifyingly effective. His world dissolved into chaos. Explosions echoed and the ground trembled beneath his feet as human squads pushed deeper into the wreckage, their movements efficient, almost predatory. Talosari soldiers, trained for precision and relying on complex technological support, fought back, but their usual order disintegrated in the face of the humans' unrelenting ferocity. A human warrior approached, its crude exosuit streaked with Talosari fluids. Zira, the once indomitable commander, found himself unable to look away. Every instinct screamed to flee, to hide. Instead, he could only watch as the primitive raised a scarred metallic limb, a flash, a burst of pain, then darkness. Word of the disaster ripped through the Talosari territories like wildfire. The news wasn't just a defeat, it was a shattering of the fundamental belief in their superiority. Whispers began, tales of crude yet insanely brave creatures willing to defy all odds, all logic. Panic flickered like embers amongst the rigid Talosari populace, stoked by the unthinkable, the image of a mighty ship reduced to a burning tomb. On the highest world of the Talosari expanse, the Elder Council convened. These ancient beings, their exoskeletons adorned with countless trophies of victories past, sat in a troubled silence. The chamber, usually a humming center of calculated decision-making, echoed with unfamiliar tension. "Analysis," a senior elder rasped, the once melodic tones now strained. The lead tactician stepped forward, its antennae twitching nervously, a sight so unusual it sent murmurs through the gathered elders. "Their weaponry, it is crude, yet they wield energy with an abandon we deem unsafe." The tactician hesitated, as though tasting a strange word. "It appears they bypass conventional containment protocols." "At the cost of their own vessel," another elder interjected, their voice laced with disbelief. "Indeed. Their tactics prioritize immediate destruction over self-preservation. It confounds all of our predictive models." The tactician's voice wavered slightly. A murmur swept through the council chamber. Self-destruction as a weapon? The notion was alien, the logic behind it unfathomable. The Talosari had always prided themselves on the efficiency of their actions, on maximizing gain while minimizing loss. "They are reckless," one elder hissed, disgust evident in their tone. "Uncivilized barbarians!" "And yet," another countered, its voice laced with a newfound note of caution, "they prevailed." Decades of expansion, of unchallenged dominance had made the Talosari strategists predictable, perhaps even complacent, their thinking rigid. Humans, it seemed, defied these carefully formed assumptions. They were a volatile, unpredictable variable that threw all of their meticulously balanced equations into disarray. "We must analyze their technology, find the weakness," the lead tactician started, but a dismissive wave from the most senior elder cut it short. "Technology is irrelevant when your enemy cares nothing for their own survival," the elder boomed, a ripple of unease running through the assembly. "Their defiance defies any logical countermeasure." The room descended into a tense silence, broken only by the soft clicks of antennae against exoskeleton, as troubled thoughts swirled within the Talosari minds. "Then we must break them," a female elder spoke, her usually quiet voice now edged with a new intensity. "Crush their spirit, demonstrate the futility of their struggle." Indeed. The lead elder's multifaceted eyes glitched with a cold light. "They value sacrifice? Let us show them the true cost of their defiance. We shall target their population centers, their homeworld." A chilling consensus fell upon the council. The Talosari had mastered precise, almost surgical strikes. Casualties were always calculated, collateral damage and necessary evil weighed in a larger strategic equation. But now a different mindset was demanded, one born of fear masquerading as ruthless determination. These creatures called themselves humans, and somewhere deep in the Talosari collective consciousness a seed, small, insistent, was planted. It was not a seed of hope, but a primal ancestral memory of what it felt like to have fear. News of the impending attack swept through the human resistance faster than any official communication. Their scattered forces, bloodied and battered yet still unbroken, steeled themselves for the brutal escalation the Talosari response seemed to promise. Captain Anya Sokolov, veteran of countless skirmishes, stood on a windswept cliff overlooking a makeshift human encampment. What passed for homeworld was a hastily established patchwork of bases within a shattered, half-terraformed landscape. Earth had been caught unprepared for interstellar war, and the cost showed in the scars etched across the people and the planet. A sensor tech rushed up to her, breathing heavily. "Ma'am, incoming transmission. It's, General Talosari broadcast," they stammered. Sokolov's stomach clenched. A general broadcast? That reeked of desperation and a chillingly public display of cruelty. "Patch her through the camp," she ordered grimly. Within moments, the harsh guttural tones of a Talosari voice filled the air, its meaning made hauntingly clear by the universal translators each soldier possessed. "Barbaric defiance. Cost of resistance. Annihilation of your kind." As the voice droned on, its pronouncements of doom echoing across the bleak landscape, Anya glanced around at her comrades. Their faces hardened, eyes blazing with a mixture of defiant fury and cold acceptance. These weren't regular soldiers, at least not in the traditional sense. They were cobbled-together survivors, engineers, scientists, miners, ordinary men and women thrust by circumstance into a war for their very existence. But beneath that mix of desperation and resilience, Anya detected something else, a flicker of that same primal intensity which had first unnerved Zara upon their initial encounter. She herself felt it, a bone-deep defiance that bordered on insanity. Perhaps that was the human advantage, the terrible strength born out of having nothing left to lose. A young recruit barely out of his teens turned to her. "Captain, they threaten our families, our children," his voice cracked. Anya put a hand on his shoulder, a rare gesture amidst their usual hardened pragmatism. "They picked the wrong species to threaten," she said, her voice grim, but fueled by an unshakable resolve. "We didn't come this far just to roll over. Now get back to work. We have a war to win." The Talosari Armada descended upon Earth with ruthless precision. Their sleek warships, once the symbol of their unchallenged power, now exuded an undeniable malice. Gone was the pretense of integration, of extending a hand of superiority. This was a campaign of calculated extermination, meant to break the human spirit beyond repair. The opening salvos were brutal. Cities, not strategic targets in the typical sense, dissolved under concentrated energy bombardments. Millions perished in blinding flashes, whole families vaporized within the blink of an eye. The humans knew this was coming, had prepared however they could, but the reality of the onslaught was still a horrific shock. Yet, they did not break. Instead of the mass surrender the Talosari strategists had expected, an icy wave of determination washed over the shattered planet. Resistance cells scattered across the ravaged landscapes, turning their homes into battlefields. They struck from the shadows, sabotaging Talosari positions with a viciousness that bordered on self-destructive. Make no mistake, humanity was reeling, on the brink of annihilation, but their spirit was a cornered beast, its most terrifying when pushed to the edge of extinction. Meanwhile, Anya and the surviving leadership desperately sought a way to strike back. Their scientists, pushed to the limits of their ingenuity, pored over the wreckage of Talosari's ships, reverse engineering the same technology that had brought them to their knees. In a hidden underground bunker, a breakthrough occurred. Dr. Ramirez, his eyes bloodshot from endless nights hunched over alien schematics, burst into the command center waving a datapad. "They have a weakness," he exclaimed, his voice ragged with exhaustion. "Their energy matrix is unstable when overloaded. It causes chain reactions. If we can deliver a focused energy surge, precisely targeted..." Ramirez trailed off, his face a mix of excitement and horror. Anya immediately grasped the implications. "We built bombs from our own power cores," she said, her voice grim. "We turned their greatest weapon against them." It was a suicide mission in its purest form. Small, nimble human fighters would have to penetrate the Talosari defenses, get close enough to trigger a catastrophic reaction within the very heart of their ships. It was a desperate move, as horrifying in its conception as the Talosari attack on their cities. But humanity, Anya knew, was at the point where unthinkable attacks were their only path to survival. Word of the new strategy spread through human forces with grim determination. Volunteers stepped forward, not with bravado, but with quiet resolve that chilled even those in command. These weren't soldiers driven by a thirst for revenge. They were parents willing to sacrifice their lives for a chance their children might survive. Engineers hoping to turn their knowledge into a desperate gamble. Lovers choosing to die together if it meant halting the slaughter of their people. The makeshift bombers were cobbled together with breathtaking speed and frightening ingenuity. Power cores meant to sustain life were redesigned into devastatingly volatile weapons. Anya watched the pilots strap into their modified fighters, their faces etched with grim acceptance. These weren't glorious dogfights of skill and maneuvering. They were one-way trips forged in the depths of despair. The counterattack commenced under the cover of night, a swarm of fragile human craft weaving through the Talosari blockade. Anya commanded them from the ground, her heart a heavy weight in her chest as she sent wave after wave of her comrades hurtling into the darkness, knowing many would never return. The first explosions ripped through the Talosari fleet, and Anya had no time for elation. Each blinding blast of energy was a human life extinguished. It was a monstrous calculation. How many of their own were they willing to lose to take out the enemy? Yet for the first time since the invasion began, the Talosari were on the defensive. Their pristine armada shuddered with each explosion, their air of invincibility cracking under the relentless human assault. Back on the Talosari flagship, the elders received the battle reports with increasing fury and disbelief. "These primates, they target our cores deliberately," one elder snarled in disgust. "It is a barbaric tactic, a perversion." "That is their strength," another hissed. "They care nothing for self-preservation. Our assumptions, our models, they fail in the face of their suicidal valor." A wave of unease swept through the once confident council. They had planned for anger, for grief, even for defiance. But this was a foe that transformed their fundamental advantage into a crippling vulnerability. "Pull back the fleet," the lead elder said, his voice laced with a bitterness he could not disguise. "Regroup and reassess." It was not an admission of defeat, not yet, but it was the dawn of a chilling realization. The Talosari had miscalculated, and their mistake might very well prove fatal. The human counterattack won them a respite, a sliver of desperately needed time. The Talosari fleet retreated, but the humans knew it was a temporary victory, bought at a terrible price. Their planet still reeked of the mass extermination, and every human settlement was a grim collection of ruins and mass graves. Yet the shift was palpable. The Talosari, so sure of their superiority, were shaken. Every engagement, even those humans lost, chipped away at the myth of their invincibility. Word spread like wildfire through the beleaguered humans. They didn't celebrate victories, they merely endured them with a hardened resolve born of seeing their world turned into an abattoir. Aboard the Talosari flagship, a war room hummed with a tension never felt before. The elders and their tacticians now faced a bewildering paradox. Every human assault, however disastrous in its outcome, revealed both the enemy's desperate determination and their growing understanding of Talosari technology. "They are adapting faster than any species we've integrated," the lead tactician hissed, antenna clicking in agitation. "Every battle teaches them how to better exploit our weaknesses." "It is as if conflict itself fuels their progress," an elder rasped, an unusual note of fear edging into his monotone. "Warfare is their crucible." Their grand strategy was in tatters. Humans weren't just a resilient species, they were one that learned and evolved terrifyingly quickly under the pressure of extinction. Each attack, each sacrifice pushed them closer to developing their own countermeasures, to turning the Talosari's strengths against them. The lead elder rose, his exoskeleton seeming to sag ever so slightly. "Issue a general directive," he said. Weariness echoing beneath the usually haughty tone. "Avoid direct engagements. Contain the remaining population centers. Minimize the opportunity for them to learn further." It was an admission, not of defeat but of a chilling new reality. The Talosari, uncontested rulers for millennia, were now reduced to a strategy of containment, fearing the rapid advancement of their stubborn, defiant, and increasingly dangerous prey. Somewhere in the ruins of what was once called a city, Anya Sokolov received the news of the Talosari's shift in tactics. A smile flickered across her tired, dirt-streaked face. It wasn't a smile of victory, but one of a hunter recognizing the first sign of fear in her quarry. Time took on a strange quality in the war-torn world. The Talosari blockade kept Earth in a choked isolation. Days bled into weeks, punctuated by sporadic outbreaks of violence and ever-present gnawing despair. Yet beneath the oppressive weight of grief and loss, something else stirred within the human spirit. The scientists, fueled by a mixture of desperation and grim determination, toiled relentlessly. They scavenged knowledge from the wreckage of each battle, reverse-engineered alien technology with brutal efficiency, and sought ways to counter the Talosari's remaining advantages. It was a race against time, a relentless pursuit of knowledge spurred on by the cries of a dying planet. Anya's command center was transformed into a chaotic think tank. Every ounce of human ingenuity was focused on the task. Miners repurposed existing tunneling equipment for stealthy insertions into Talosari-occupied zones. Comm specialists found ways to hack and disrupt enemy networks. Medics developed gruesome procedures to keep the suicidal bomber pilots alive long enough to complete their missions. The cost was appalling. Casualties mounted, not just on the front lines, but in the labs and makeshift workshops. Brilliant minds succumbed to exhaustion, and the toll was etched onto the faces of the survivors in a way no battle scar could replicate. But amidst the hardship, there was a relentless focus, a cold fury that burned brighter with each passing day. Humanity wasn't just fighting back, they were evolving, their methods shifting from a frantic improvisation to chillingly calculated countermeasures. In the opulent heart of the Talosari flagship, an undercurrent of dread had replaced the initial arrogance. Reports filtered back of human squads armed with jury-rigged energy weapons that mirrored their own. Talosari patrols vanished and their communication outposts mysteriously fell silent. "They hunt us now," a young tactician whispered during a strategy session, their voice shaking. The elders shifted uneasily. Fear, true fear, was a novel sensation, its icy touch sending shivers down their armored spines. The Talosari, architects of meticulous military campaigns, found themselves reacting rather than dictating. Their invasion had ground to a bloody stalemate, and all their strategists could do was desperately plug the leaks as the fragile dam of their absolute control began to crack. News of a secret human project whispered in hushed tones and codenamed Phoenix reached the highest echelons of the Talosari ranks. It sent a wave of icy dread through their fleet. The humans, pushed to the brink of extinction, were poised to take a last desperate gamble, a gamble that might not just cripple the Talosari, but extinguish the light of their civilization entirely. Operation Phoenix was born not out of hope, but from the bleak understanding that sometimes survival hinges on mutually assured destruction. Dr. Ramirez, the haunted genius behind the original bomber concept, now presented something far more horrifying. "We can't match their firepower, their technology," he told Anya and the others, his weary eyes reflecting the magnitude of the proposal. "But we do have a resource they underestimate: our desperation and our planet." His plan was shocking in its audacity. Using complex drilling and energy manipulation techniques, they would tunnel vast chambers deep beneath Earth's volatile mantle. These makeshift caverns would then be packed with a terrifying concentration of unstable energy, repurposed cores and crudely weaponized power sources cobbled together from whatever they could salvage. Anya stared at the schematics, nausea welling up within her. "We could turn portions of our own world into bombs." Her voice was barely a whisper. Detonators would be rigged throughout the Talosari fleet within their command centers around their occupied zones. Ramirez explained, his voice flat and devoid of emotion, as if he were discussing a lab experiment and not a world-ending cataclysm. "One signal, and we can trigger a chain reaction reaching deep into the planet's heart." The command center fell into a stunned silence. It was a monstrous act of self-immolation, sacrificing a part of their dying world to annihilate the enemy, or die with them. "They expected us to surrender," Anya said finally, her voice laced with ice. "We'll show them the price of pushing a species to the brink." The preparations for Operation Phoenix were carried out under a shroud of secrecy and grim determination. Talosari surveillance detected the unusual seismic activity, but even their best analysts couldn't decipher the true horror brewing beneath the shattered surface of the human world. Meanwhile, the war raged on in desperate skirmishes across Earth's ravaged surface and the space around it. The Talosari, increasingly wary and demoralized, escalated their own attacks. But amidst the bloodshed, one thing was undeniable. The hunters had become the hunted. The image of a mighty Talosari fleet brought not awe, but a primal surge of hate-fueled defiance in the human survivors. Within the Talosari flagships, the Elders received an impossible report. A small human force had infiltrated their highest security compound, their very homeworld. The notion of being attacked at the heart of their vast empire was unthinkable. The Elders rushed to the control room, panic gnawing at their usual cold certainty, and on the view screen they saw her. Anya Sokolov, battle-scarred and defiant, strapped to a command console laced with an unholy number of alien power cores. Her smile was that of a cornered predator. "You wanted to exterminate us?" she rasped through the transmission. "Now let's see if your precious civilization could withstand a taste of its own medicine." The transmission cut. The Elders stood frozen, their world reduced to the chilling resolve etched on a single human's face. Operation Phoenix wasn't about winning. It was about making the unthinkable the only remaining option. It was about dragging the mighty Talosari down to the fires of extinction with them. The detonation signal rippled across the makeshift network, carried through salvaged Talosari comms by the very human forces embedded within the enemy's heart. On the bridge of the vast Talosari flagship, warnings blared as the detonation sequence initiated. The Elders, so used to absolute control, stared in mute horror at the cascading red alerts. Ships, command outposts, even occupied zones on Earth. The intricate network they'd built to dominate was now their own death warrant. Across the ravaged remains of Earth, human soldiers and survivors watched the skies light up. Explosions bloomed amidst the Talosari fleet, the once mighty warships disintegrating under the onslaught unleashed from the very world they sought to conquer. Deep within the secret underground bunkers, Anya and the surviving command staff gripped their consoles. Seismic shockwaves rippled across the world, a testament to the destructive power they'd released. Sections of continents fractured, oceans erupted in violent spasms. It was apocalypse unleashed. Yet, through the tremors and the deafening boom of the planetary cataclysm, a twisted satisfaction ran through the humans. The price was their world, their lives, perhaps even their eventual extinction of their species. But they had torn the Talosari's power away from them in the end. And as the tremors subsided, the surviving fleet began a hasty, panicked withdrawal. The grand campaign of conquest had turned into a desperate scramble for survival. The Talosari were crippled, their legend of invincibility shattered irrevocably by a species they had dismissed as inferior, a species willing to burn everything, including themselves, rather than submit. News of Earth's partial destruction spread across the remaining Talosari outposts with chilling speed. Demoralization spread like a plague. The mighty war machine sputtered, then ground to a confused halt. The Elders on their own devastated homeworld were left with a hollow victory. They had survived, yet their empire was a reduced and scattered, terrified remnant of its former glory. On Earth, Anya Sokolov stood amidst the ruins, gazing at the altered skies. Their victory, if it could even be called that, was written in the radioactive scars gouged into their planet. The human population had been decimated, and the future was bleak and uncertain. But as she watched a group of children playing amidst the rubble, a fierce spark ignited within her. They had paid a terrible, almost unimaginable price, but they lived. Humanity had clawed its way back from the brink. They had stared into the abyss of extinction and spat in its face, broken and forever changed, perhaps. And in the echoing silence of a devastated world, a new legend began to spread, this time not of Talosari might, but of a species forged in the fires of unyielding defiance. They called themselves human, an imperfect, battle-scarred, and terribly dangerous people. Across the stars, the whispers began. Never again underestimate the creatures who will burn their own world to ashes before surrendering. For in that desperate fire, a terrible strength is born.